Bethany Meeker was sleeping at her home in Humble, Texas, one morning in May of 2023 when a stray bullet fatally struck her in the head. Her boyfriend, Ricardo Lung, realized she was injured when he awoke to the couple's alarm at 6 a.m. He noticed a bullet hole in their bedroom wall coming from outside, and Meeker was unresponsive. Emergency responders pronounced the young woman dead at the scene, and police began investigating to determine the source of the bullet. Roughly 4 hours later, a group of people were seen breaking into vehicles outside the apartment complex. A neighbor across the parking lot, Darius Lewis, had noticed the thieves trying to steal his catalytic converter and gone outside with his gun. Lewis told investigators that he fired a few rounds into the ground to scare off the car burglars. But according to authorities, the bullet that struck Meeker in the head matched his gun. He was booked into the Harris County Jail, where he remains held on a criminally negligent homicide charge, with bail set at $75,000. Number 16. Courtney Edwards. 34-year-old mother of 3. Courtney Edwards was working as a ground crew member at Montgomery Regional Airport in Alabama on New Year's Eve 2022 when she was sucked into the engine of an American Airlines plane. She died in a horrific accident, which occurred while she was working near a parked Embraer jet that was waiting to take off for Falls, Fort Worth, Texas. Surveillance footage showed Edwards walking toward the rear of the aircraft while carrying an orange safety cone before she disappeared from view. The plane's engines automatically shut down, but it was too late to save the mortally wounded employee. An investigation by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration found that Edwards' employer, Piedmont Airlines, was guilty of a serious safety breach that led to the woman's preventable death. Consequently, the company was fined over $15,000. In a statement, the Communications Workers of America Union cited unclear communications, a lack of effective training, and unclear instructions from supervisors as factors that contributed to the tragedy. Number 15. Tika. In a recent case of mistaken identity that made news headlines in August of 2024, a pair of Alaska state troopers were charged with violently assaulting a man in the Kenai Peninsula community of Soldotna. Canine handler Jason Woodruff and Sergeant Joseph Miller thought they had encountered Garrett Tika, who was wanted for failing to serve a 10-day jail sentence for driving with a revoked license. In reality, they were interacting with Garrett's cousin, Ben Tika. During the arrest, the troopers pepper sprayed, beat, tased, and sicked a police dog on Ben, causing serious injuries that required surgery to repair. In addition to lacerations to his head and body, he suffered a fractured shoulder and an open dog bite wound. Following an investigation into the incident, Woodruff and Miller were charged with misdemeanor assault. James Cockrell, the commissioner of the state's Department of Public Safety, said he had never seen anything like what was depicted in the troopers' body cam footage from the arrest. He described feeling sickened by the video. Both troopers are on administrative leave pending the outcome of their cases. In announcing the arrests, Cockrell also said that the department is investigating other incidents that Woodruff and Miller were involved in to determine whether they had committed past violations. Number 14. Briana So. 17-year-old Briana So had just finished talking on the phone with her mother during her walk home from work in March of 2024 when she was fatally shot just steps from her Long Beach, California home. Emergency responders found her clinging to life and immediately began trying to save her, but she succumbed to her injuries after spending several days in the hospital. Following a months-long investigation, prosecutors arrested 34-year-old Troy Lamar Fox on suspicion of Soto's murder. While his alleged motive is unclear, authorities said that he was seen fleeing the scene on foot and removing pieces of clothing on surveillance footage from the area. Fox was already in custody on an unrelated weapons charge when he was charged in connection with Soto's death. In addition to the security video, he was reportedly connected to the crime through DNA and cell phone evidence. He remains in custody at the Los Angeles County Jail amid the ongoing case. Number 13. Valeria Rodriguez. High school student Valeria Rodriguez was eating dinner at her home in Round Lake Beach, Illinois in August of 2024 when a stray bullet pierced the window and struck her in the torso. She had just sat down at her kitchen table to enjoy her meal when gunfire erupted outside her house, which is located just outside of Chicago at around 9 o'clock at night. Rodriguez was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital, and investigators traced the bullet's trajectory to a park across the street from her residence. A shell casing was retrieved from the park, and prosecutors charged the alleged gunman, 19-year-old Chorbonia Poole Jr., with first-degree murder, aggravated discharge of a firearm, and unlawful possession of a weapon by a felon. The accused killer reportedly claimed that he had not left his house since the afternoon on the day of the incident, but surveillance footage from nearby residences reportedly proved otherwise and showed him heading in the direction of the park with a friend. Phone location data also showed that Poole had left his house and returned just minutes after the shooting, and the alleged murder weapon was found in his backyard. While authorities do not believe Rodriguez was the intended target of the shooting, Lake County Assistant State's Attorney Jeffrey Facklem said that Poole should have been well aware that people were inside their homes at that time of night. According to the most recent available updates on the case, he remains held without bail at the Lake County Jail. Number 12. Christy Young. A 38-year-old factory worker from Edmonton, Kentucky, named Christy Young, was struck by an out-of-control firework at a friend's barbecue in July of 2015, leaving every bone in her face broken. She also lost an eye from the flyaway explosive, which fired sideways instead of toward the sky, thereby making a beeline for the woman's head as she sat and talked with her friends. Young spent 41 days in the intensive care unit, where she suffered a brain hemorrhage that paralyzed the left side of her body. In addition to her face being shattered and losing her left eye, the front part of her skull was removed and she was left with just 30% vision in her right eye. Doctors initially didn't expect Young to survive, but she pulled through. She went on to spend 9 months in rehab and was still unable to stand or walk on her own when she was discharged from the hospital, resulting in the loss of her job. Young later told reporters that at first she couldn't bear to look at herself in the mirror. She was so put off by her own appearance that she asked the nurse to cover the mirror. Since the accident, she's undergone more than 30 surgeries to repair the damage to her face. As of late 2018, Young had regained some of her mobility with the use of a walker, but was still on the lengthy road to recovery, and her life remained changed in every imaginable way. She found a new purpose as an advocate for fireworks safety, who encourages people to avoid fireworks if possible, or at least be very careful with them, and to consider attending public displays instead of using them at home. Number 11. Scott Goodwin Bay. In November of 2014, a paranoid gunman took the lives of 4 people at a hotel in North Glennston, Missouri, because he believed that the victims were telling police about his drug-related activities. 43-year-old Trevor Fantroy, 44-year-old Lewis Green, 29-year-old Danielle Keys, and 24-year-old Christopher Freeman were shot and killed by Scott Goodwin Bay. One of the victims, Christopher Freeman, was trying to walk away from the shooter when a bullet struck him in the back of the head. Goodwin Bay was initially charged with the murders in 2015, but a judge concluded that he couldn't be definitely linked to the killings and dismissed the case. The following year, he was indicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder in 2018, and the case finally went to trial in September 2024, nearly a decade after the quadruple murder. Witnesses who took the stand to testify described a group of rooms at the hotel, including the one where the shooting took place, as a hotbed of drug activity. The 10 people at the scene were reportedly high on methamphetamine, including the victims and Goodwin Bay, who reportedly behaved strangely and brandished a gun several times in the hours leading up to the murders. Following the trial, the jury found Goodwin Bay guilty of all 4 murder counts, along with 4 counts of armed criminal action. He's currently awaiting sentencing, which is scheduled for November. Number 10. Shane Patrick Burke. A disabled U.S. Army veteran and wildlife photographer named Shane Patrick Burke was hiking on Signal Mountain in Wyoming's Grand Teton National Park in May of 2024 when he was attacked by a protective mother grizzly bear. The 35-year-old Massachusetts native had gone into the wilderness alone earlier that day after telling his wife he'd meet back up with her in the parking lot an hour later. He hoped to catch a snapshot of a great gray owl prior to the couple's departure from the park. Burke later said that an uncomfortable feeling overcame him about an hour into the trek as he headed back toward the parking lot. Fearing a wild animal attack, he began breaking branches, talking to himself, and singing in an attempt to prevent an unwanted encounter. During that time, he noticed a grizzly bear cub running up a nearby hill. Then he saw its mother, who charged straight in his direction in a last-ditch effort to prevent the worst from happening. Burke grabbed his bear spray and shouted at the creature, but the bear continued rushing in his direction and took him to the ground. Burke landed face down on the ground and tried to protect his vital organs as the bear mauled his shoulder, then clamped her jaw down on his leg and slammed him against the ground, repeatedly biting him in several places in the process. Just when the unfortunate hiker thought the bear was about to go for a kill bite to the back of his neck. She bit his can of beer spray, causing it to explode in her face. She ran away, and Burke applied makeshift tourniquets to his legs as he text messaged his wife and dialed 911 as he awaited a rescue helicopter. He held a knife and prayed that the beer wouldn't return. Fearing that he might die before help arrived, Burke filmed a goodbye video for his loved ones, but first responders managed to find him in time to save his life, and he was taken to a hospital where he underwent emergency surgery to repair his leg wounds. Doctors predicted that Burke would make a full physical recovery, but he described the ordeal as the most terrifying experience of his life in an Instagram video, saying that it was scarier than the things he endured during overseas combat. He said he harbored no ill will toward the bear who attacked him, knowing that she was just trying to protect her cubs, and that he even asked wildlife police not to kill her. Park officials confirmed that they honored his wishes and used the situation as an opportunity to remind visitors of basic precautions they should take to prevent an attack. Number 9. Benyamin PNE. 21-year-old Benyamin PNE was meeting with a friend at the Stratford shopping centre in London one night after work in March of 2018 when they were attacked by a group of men. PNE was stabbed to death, and investigators later determined that the victims were minding their own business when the assailants targeted them at random. The fatal confrontation began when two of the men approached PNE's friend, 25-year-old Alexander Suchi, on a bicycle and struck him in the head. A few minutes later, the suspects rode past again and verbally harassed PNE and Suchi. The group of attackers continued harassing the two men, and the altercation eventually became physical. At one point, a security guard saw the violence unfolded and intervened. As the suspects were being led to the exit, 23-year-old Vlaslav Yakimchuk lunged at PNE and delivered the fatal stab wound. From beginning to end, the encounter lasted about 4 minutes, and PNE was trying to protect Suchi when Yakimchuk plunged the blade into his heart. Authorities charged Yakimchuk, 19-year-old Alexis Varela, 19-year-old Kevin Duarte, 20-year-old Moses Kasul, and 18-year-old Mario Zvavaim in connection with the deadly attack. Yakimchuk pleaded guilty to murder, violent disorder, and carrying a bladed article, and was sentenced to life with a minimum of 24 years. Moses Kasul was sentenced to 12 years for manslaughter and violent assault, and Kevin Duarte received the same sentence. The other defendants were convicted of lesser offenses and received sentences ranging from 30 to 40 months in youthful offender facilities. Number 8. Melanie Yates. 23-year-old Melanie Yates of Zion, Illinois, was reading a Bible bedtime story to her young daughter on a Sunday night in October of 2021 when a stray bullet fatally struck her in the head. The tragedy occurred during an exchange of gunfire outside the young woman's home. Her husband Daniel initially mistook the sound of gunshots as loud fireworks, but he quickly realized that he was mistaken when he found his wife suffering from an extremely critical wound. Melanie was rushed to the hospital where she died the next morning after being taken off life support. About a month after the tragedy, authorities announced that a teenage neighbor named Zachariah Miles was wanted in connection with Melanie's death. An arrest warrant was issued, and Miles was apprehended in Waukegan about a month later on suspicion of first-degree murder. According to prosecutors, Miles exited his home and fired his rifle at someone. He pleaded not guilty and was held in custody with bail set at $3 million. The current status of the case is unclear. Number 7. Thomas Williamson. In a devastating case of mistaken identity, a trio of British teenagers stabbed a man named Thomas Williamson to death in the English town of Tyldesley in September of 2021. 19-year-old Joshua Prescott, 18-year-old Kane Adamson, and another suspect named Ben Dorber were searching for a man who had just punched someone outside of a pub when they crossed paths with Williamson, who has a history of mental illness and was taking a walk to clear his mind. The suspects were not involved in the dispute outside the pub, and neither was Williamson. Yet they made the fateful decision to stab the victim in the heart and lungs, killing him at the scene. According to prosecutors, Prescott, Adamson, and Dorber had been drinking alcohol and huffing nitrous oxide on the night of the deadly attack and were driving around looking for trouble when they decided to involve themselves in the dispute. As the attackers approached the pub, the man who had punched a fellow patron, David Shuttleworth, ran and hid. One of the car's occupants mistakenly identified Williamson as Shuttleworth, and they wasted no time launching into the fatal assault. Afterward, they got rid of their cell phones and tried burning their car in an attempt to destroy evidence. Prescott denied being with his friends at the time of the murder but was found guilty and sentenced to 17 years to life. Dauber admitted to stabbing Williamson but claimed he acted in self-defense. The court didn't buy his story and he was sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years, while Adamson received an 18-year minimum sentence. Number 6. Anthony Brigman. 47-year-old professional bodybuilder Anthony Bashir Brigman of Syracuse, New York, stopped at a home he was renting to a friend to pick up his mail in November of 2017 and was arrested in what was later described as the biggest cocaine bust in Onondaga County's history. He was arrested on multiple serious drug-related felonies, including several possession counts. During the search of the property, authorities found 200 pounds of illegal drugs, including 55 pounds of cocaine worth an estimated $3 million. At the time, the home was being rented by a fellow bodybuilder named Billy Breadman Sullivan, who was arrested on the same charges as Brigman, along with additional counts for allegedly kidnapping and beating his wife. Brigman spent 4 days in jail before being released on his own recognizance, then fought for 6 months to clear his name while insisting he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. If convicted as charged, he could have faced decades behind bars. He later told Syracuse.com that he had seen the justice system fail before. Brigman was afraid that he would be wrongfully convicted and wasn't even sure if his lawyer believed in his innocence. Throughout the investigation, Brigman was able to prove that he was renting the residence to Sullivan, and Sullivan told law enforcement that Brigman was uninvolved in the drug operation. When asked how he had failed to notice the massive quantity of drugs at the property, Brigman simply said that he wasn't a nosy person. He didn't snoop into Sullivan's belongings, and the majority of the drugs were locked in a safe in the basement bathroom. Brigman also told Syracuse.com that he was previously unaware of Sullivan's drug activities and that he felt betrayed by his longtime friend. In July of 2018, the Onondaga County District Attorney's Office announced that the charges against Brigman would be dropped. The prosecutor admitted that they couldn't prove that Brigman knew about the drugs inside the home, and the court ruled that the case would be dismissed as long as he avoided any further legal trouble for 6 months. Number 5. Mark Boyce. In January of 2017, 36-year-old Mark Boyce was ambushed and bludgeoned by 3 men on a footpath outside his home outside the Australian city of Adelaide. He suffered a severe brain injury and was taken off life support 8 days after being rushed to the hospital. During the investigation into the case, law enforcement found the vehicle involved in the crime cut, burned, and buried nearly 12 feet below ground on a Hells Angels club property. Authorities ultimately charged 25-year-old Hells Angels member Joshua Roy Grant and 33-year-old Tobias Salstorfer with Boyce's murder, while the third suspect remains at large to this day. According to prosecutors, Boyce's friend was the intended target of the attack. Grant was accused of playing a lesser role by holding the victim down while Salstorfer and the other man beat him. In late 2019, Grant was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years. The judge overseeing the case acknowledged that Grant did not mean to kill Boyce, but had participated in a joint enterprise to inflict grievous bodily harm in a pre-planned but spur-of-the-moment fashion. Boyce's father was outraged by the sentence, which to him seemed like a mere slap on the wrist for taking an innocent human life. Salstorfer finally went to trial in April of 2024 and was found guilty of his role in Boyce's murder. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 years. Number 4. Stephen Justin Ayers. 33-year-old Stephen Justin Ayers of Panama City, Florida, had just brought his newborn son home from the hospital in June of 2014 when he was struck in the back of the head by a stray bullet from his neighbor's gun. He died instantly. The tragedy occurred while Ayers celebrated his son's birth in his backyard with his family. His neighbor, 62-year-old Charles Edward Shishler, said the gun, a 9mm pistol, discharged accidentally when he picked it up by the trigger. Shishler was arrested on suspicion of manslaughter and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Following further investigation, authorities charged him with additional felony counts of methamphetamine and paraphernalia possession. In May of 2015, nearly a year after the shooting, Shishler pleaded guilty to manslaughter, methamphetamine possession, and the gun charge. He was sentenced to 14 years and is due to be released in June of 2026. Number 3. Cyclists v. Wild Cougar. In February of 2024, a group of competitive cyclists in their 50s and 60s encountered an aggressive wild cougar along a nature trail outside Falls City, about 19 miles into a biking trip. The wildcat pounced on one of the group members, 60-year-old Kerry Berger and bit her face, prompting the others to intervene in an attempt to save their friend's life. For 15 harrowing minutes, 5 of the cyclists fought to pry the mountain lion off the victim using sticks and rocks in an attempt to scare it off. One group member attempted to choke the big cat, while another stabbed it with a small knife. They eventually trapped the animal beneath one of their bikes, thereby giving Berger a chance to crawl to safety and protecting themselves from harm. The cyclists held the creature down for a half hour until wildlife officers arrived to take over the situation. Berger later told local station KUOW that she thought her teeth were coming loose as the mountain lion clamped its jaws down on her face. She said she could feel the bones crush it and thought she was going to swallow her teeth, but she survived with slightly less severe injuries. Today's topic was requested by Julius King 9374 and Amroy Hemans N5N. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. New Jersey train tragedy. At least 20 train passengers were injured and an operator died on a Monday afternoon in October of 2024 when a passenger train struck a tree that had fallen on the tracks while traveling through Mansfield Township. There were 45 passengers on board when the collision occurred, leaving nearly half of the train's occupants wounded. According to the most recent available updates on the case, an investigation is underway to determine how the tree ended up on the tracks. Just days earlier, a train struck a truck along the same line just a few miles away, injuring 4 passengers and the operator. These mark the latest incidents in a disturbing trend in recent years, which seems to reflect New Jersey Transit's ailing infrastructure. The investigation results remain to be seen. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, stay tuned till after number 1 because we've got our previous release of When Obsessive Behavior Goes Wrong coming right up. Number 1. Helen Davey. In what could perhaps best be described as a true freak accident, 39-year-old Helen Davey of County Durham, England, died in 2024 after a faulty ottoman bed crushed her neck. According to a coroner's report, she was leaning over the gas lift bed's storage area when the mattress platform suddenly descended, trapping her against the side panel of the bed's base by her neck. Her cause of death was listed as positional asphyxia. A coroner's inquest ruled that the bed's structure is inherently flawed and poses a danger to its users, making it possible that a similar tragedy could occur in the future, unless corrective action is taken. It's unclear whether the company plans to recall or fix the design of the bed in order to prevent history from repeating itself. Glamour model and business owner Brittany Rhea Phillips, aged 26, was run over on November the 21st of 2020 by her ex-boyfriend, James Heath Kitchens. The incident, which took place in Starkville, Mississippi, was described by local law enforcement as one of domestic violence, but further details weren't immediately provided. A friend of Phillips's reported that Kitchens, a former police officer for the city of Tupelo in Lee County, was abusive towards her and that their relationship had fallen apart. He was a father to Phillips's youngest child, and it was speculated that he'd refused to accept that she wanted to move on. Law enforcement arrived at the scene on Riviera Road and found that Phillips had been struck by a vehicle driven by 30-year-old Kitchens. The model was taken to a hospital where she was pronounced dead. Kitchens was charged with manslaughter and released on a $25,000 bond. Number 6. Shaana Grace. British teenager Shaana Grace met Michael Lane, who was 8 years her senior, in 2015 when they both worked at Brighton Fire Alarms. They became a couple but eventually broke up, and Grace got back together with her previous boyfriend. By then, however, Lane had become obsessed with her and confided in a friend that Grace would pay for what she's done. On August the 25th of 2016, Lane waited until Grace was alone at her home in Portslade, East Sussex. He made his way inside, cut the 19-year-old's throat, and set her bedroom on fire with her in it. Lane was arrested that day and initially lied to the police about his whereabouts at the time of the murder before admitting that he'd been to Grace's home. He claimed to have found her already dead and that he hadn't alerted anyone for fear of being considered the killer. His trial in the spring of 2017 only lasted a few weeks before he was found guilty and sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years served. The case would earn a great deal of attention, particularly due to the repeated failings of Sussex police in addressing the extensive harassment to which Lane had subjected the victim. From the time that they'd broken up and leading to the murder, there had been multiple instances of increasingly more threatening behavior from Lane. It placed a tracker on Grace's car and caused damage to the vehicle, Grace alerted the police in February and again in March after Lane had grabbed her by the hair and snatched her phone. The man was arrested on suspicion of assault but eventually released, while Grace was fined for wasting the police's time by not disclosing they'd been in a relationship. Other incidents followed that included Lane stalking her, entering her home with a stolen key to watch the teenager as she slept, or repeatedly calling her from blocked numbers. The police ultimately deemed the case low risk, even though Lane had similarly harassed at least a dozen girls and women from 2006 to 2016. On August the 4th of 2016, Grace and a friend saw him loitering outside her home. By then, however, she'd become so disillusioned with the police's response that she was afraid they would react in disbelief and fine her again. Even with a friend as a witness, she didn't alert the authorities. Within weeks, she would be dead. Number 5. Megan Jaquis. Florida woman Megan Jaquis, a former child protective investigator trainee with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, was arrested on multiple charges in 2019, which stemmed from a campaign of harassment she'd led against her ex-boyfriend. Over the course of a year, 25-year-old Jaquis had sent the man hundreds of texts, disguised her number to call him relentlessly, and accessed online accounts in his name. With the sole intention of harassing him, she used his personal information to file for a job application with a plumbing company in August, and also filed false complaints with law enforcement claiming he'd been responsible for noise violations and acts of animal cruelty. Jaquis was arrested on charges that included stalking as well as harassment by use of personal identification and accessing a computer or electronic device without authority. Number 4. Najinski Lassia Dixs. After dating for about 3 months, 37-year-old Najinski Lassia Dixs and Terry Hickman, aged 44, broke up in May of 2020. NBC Chicago reported that one person familiar with the couple claimed that Dixs began stalking Hickman in the aftermath. At the time, Dixs was a gender studies PhD candidate at the University of Illinois and an employee at the University of Notre Dame. Approximately 6 months after her relationship with Hickman had ended, she tracked him down to his home in Washington, D.C. On the evening of November the 14th, local police responded to reports of shots fired at the man's residence. Officers found Hickman suffering from gunshot wounds on the floor of his apartment, and Dixs talking on the phone to her mother saying, "He pushed me and I shot him." Witnesses told law enforcement that they'd seen the former couple in the parking lot prior to the shooting. They then heard a woman screaming for help after multiple gunshots had rung out and saw Dixs pacing on the balcony. Hickman passed away from his injuries. Dixs was taken to a hospital where she told staff that she was experiencing memory loss. Doctors found an abrasion on the inside of her left lower lip but couldn't determine the cause and told investigators that the woman didn't appear to have been physically assaulted. While she was questioned at the station, Dixs asked detectives to show her items that might unblock her memory. Upon being handed a photo of Hickman, she started crying and repeatedly asked for it to be taken away from her, saying, "You don't do people you love like that. That's not love." She was charged with second-degree murder, and her case was ongoing according to updates on the matter. Number 3. Michelle Felton. Michelle Felton and Ryan Harley from Cheshire, England, had dated from May of 2020 until February of 2022, when their relationship broke down following a physical altercation. Felton kicked Harley in the groin and he accidentally broke her finger in the scrap, but no criminal charges were filed. About 12 days later, Harley ended the relationship, but 28-year-old Felton didn't accept the decision and subsequently bombarded him with texts and calls. In some of them, the woman asked if they were still going out and when they'd meet. When Harley didn't reply, she accused him of cheating on his driver's test. The man repeatedly told her to stop contacting him and that he didn't want to resume their relationship, but Felton wouldn't desist. Harley, who reportedly suffered from anxiety and depression, experienced a great deal of distress from the harassment. It lasted from February the 15th to the 26th, and the woman would call or send him messages up to 150 times on a daily basis. Harley ultimately alerted law enforcement after Felton had begun leaving gifts on his doorstep. He told officers, "I just wanted to go away and for it all to stop." Felton admitted harassment at Warrington Magistrates Court in January of 2023. She was banned from contacting Harley for 18 months and sentenced to an 18-month community order with a requirement she participated in 30 days of rehabilitative activities. Number 2. Ramon Molina. In the spring of 2022, a Florida man was arrested twice by deputies from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office for harassing his ex-girlfriend. For about 2 weeks leading up to April the 26th, the unnamed woman in question had blocked all communication with her ex, 21-year-old Ramon Molina. She'd previously told the man that she wanted to move on from the relationship, but he messaged and called her obsessively, even at her workplace. He then went to her home, unannounced, and made his way inside through a back door. The victim locked herself in the bathroom and shouted at him to leave her alone. As she later told the authorities, she'd heard Molina through the door threatening to take away her therapy dog, but he eventually left the residence. He was arrested on stalking charges after midnight on April the 27th and released later in the day after being handed a no-contact order. Molina was taken into custody again on May the 12th for violating the order, when his ex-girlfriend alerted law enforcement that he'd called her from an unknown number. The calls were confirmed by an Instagram conversation between Molina and a third party, in which the former admitted that he'd contacted his ex, describing the move as a mistake and adding that he wouldn't do it again. Number 1. Adam Cobb. In the spring of 2022, Jamie Joyner was in the process of moving out of the house she shared with Adam Cobb, with whom she'd recently broken up after a relationship lasting several years. Jamie's older sister, Jessica Joyner Escott, flew to Illinois from California to help her, and they rented a U-Haul. They drove the vehicle to the property in rural Collinsville to pick up Jamie's belongings and her pet bull, Jada. 30-year-old Jamie had moved from Missouri to the Metro East to be with Cobb a few years prior. By multiple accounts, Cobb had a temper, and in 2018, a woman had filed for a protection order against him. Following a business dispute, he'd reportedly harassed her family in a manner that included taking pictures of her teenage daughter. In the later stages of his relationship with Jamie, whenever she talked about leaving, Cobb would get angry and threaten to hurt her or take away her dog. His obsessive and controlling behavior reached a boiling point on the morning of April the 2nd of 2022, when Jamie and Jessica made the drive to Collinsville. At around 10:30 a.m., a 911 call was placed in which a woman was heard screaming, followed by the sound of gunshots. Responding officers found both sisters and Jada shot dead on the property, while the U-Haul was still parked in the driveway. Based on the proximity of a cell phone to Jamie's body, law enforcement determined that she'd made the call. 32-year-old Cobb became the main suspect in the killings. He'd fled the scene and later that same day engaged the police in a car chase through central Illinois. As shown in body cam footage, subsequently released by the authorities, he eventually stopped his partially disabled pickup truck on US Route 51 north of Panna. Cobb exited the vehicle and pointed a handgun at state troopers, at which point he was shot. He was taken to a regional hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. Thanks for watching. If you could choose to find out exactly on what day you would pass away, would you want to know? Why or why not? Let us know in the comments section below.